Picture this. A packed Delta Airlines flight from Chicago to Dallas, the cabin buzzing with the restless energy of a Friday night crowd. Tired parents, frazzled business travelers, and a TSA agent who thought he'd seen it all. 34-year-old Darius Coleman slouched in seat 23B, his faded Chicago Bulls hoodie pulled low, earbuds pumping Kendrick Lamar as the Boeing 737 roared toward takeoff. After a decade of confiscating nail clippers and dodging tantrums at O'Hare, he figured this trip, a quick weekend hop to his sister's baby shower, would be his chance to finally clock out. But here's the kicker. Just as the plane hit cruising altitude, a voice sliced through the hum like a siren, sharp, loud, and dripping with entitlement. It came from first class, where a woman in a leopard print top and clashing gold chains was already turning a routine flight into a pressure cooker. "This seat cushion's flatter than a pancake," she barked, loud enough to make half the plane cringe. Darius dubbed her First-Class Felicia on the spot. And trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how this showdown unfolds. Where are you watching from? Drop your country and time in the comments. Let's see who's riding this turbulence with us. For Darius, air travel wasn't just a commute. It was a battlefield he'd navigated since he was 24, fresh out of community college and thrust into the chaos of TSA. Back then he'd been wide-eyed, a kid from Chicago's South Side who thought a government job meant stability. 10 years later, the shine had worn off. He'd wrestled overstuffed bags from sweaty hands, stared down irate passengers over banned toothpaste, and memorized every line of the security handbook just to keep his sanity. Off-duty, he blended in, cargo shorts, a playlist heavy on rap, and a knack for disappearing into the crowd. This flight was supposed to be his reprieve, a rare 48 hours to trade the fluorescent glare of O'Hare for his sister's backyard barbecue. He'd even snagged an exit row seat, volunteering to man the door in a pinch. Old habits from the job died hard. As the plane climbed into the Midwest dusk, the clouds glowing orange outside his window, Darius let his guard slip, scrolling Reddit threads about the Bears' latest flop. Then Felicia's voice hit, a grating crescendo that yanked him back to reality. She was mid-50s maybe, her leopard print blouse screaming money, or at least the illusion of it. The gold chains draped around her neck jangled with every dramatic gesture, and her complaints had started the second she'd boarded. "Too flat!" she'd snapped about her seat. Then, "too dim," about the lighting, each grievance a performance for an audience she assumed was riveted. Darius had seen her type 1,000 times, entitled travelers who treated a $500 ticket like a golden key to the kingdom. The flight attendant, a wiry guy in his 20s with a plastered-on smile, darted around her like she was a live grenade. "I'll see what I can do, ma'am," he murmured, but Felicia waved him off, her manicured nails flashing. "This is why I don't fly Delta. Y'all don't value loyalty." Darius smirked, sinking deeper into his hoodie. He'd spent years diffusing her kind at security, folks who thought a rewards card trumped the rules. His plan? Stay low, sip his ginger ale, and let the 3-hour flight coast by. But Felicia's voice was a heat-seeking missile, and peace was starting to feel like a pipe dream. The cabin settled as the seatbelt sign flicked off, the hum of conversation blending with the engines. Across the aisle, a mom wrestled a squirming toddler, shooting Darius a look that said, "We're in this together." He nodded back, a flicker of camaraderie. Outside, the horizon swallowed the sun, and for a moment the flight felt almost calm. Then Felicia struck again. "This light's blinding me," she whined, jabbing at the overhead panel. Darius stifled a laugh. "Lady, it's a plane, not a penthouse." He popped his earbuds back in, cranking the volume, but her complaints pierced through like static. He glanced around. Heads were turning, eyes rolling. A guy in a Cowboys jersey muttered, "Karen's at it again," and Darius grinned. The nickname fit, but First-Class Felicia had a ring to it, a private joke to keep him sane. Still, something nagged at him. He'd spent a decade reading people, spotting the twitchy liars, the smug rule breakers, and Felicia's tantrum felt off, like a distraction masking something bigger. Was she just a diva, or was trouble brewing at 30,000 feet? Darius's past sharpened that instinct. Growing up, he'd learned to spot danger fast. Gang tags on the corner, a cousin's shifty glance before a deal went south. TSA had honed it further. He'd caught a guy with a knife taped to his ankle once, all because the dude wouldn't stop fidgeting. Felicia wasn't fidgeting, but her volume, her relentless edge, it set his radar pinging. He shook it off, chalking it up to burnout. 10 years of this crap will make you paranoid, he thought, leaning back as the drink cart rattled closer. The clink of cans and crinkle of pretzels promised a break from the tension. He'd earned that ginger ale, a small reward for surviving a week of checkpoint chaos. Up ahead, Felicia's voice flared again, cutting through the calm like a blade. "Sparkling water, not this sugary trash," she snapped, shoving a Diet Coke back at a new attendant, a woman in her 30s with a tight bun and a tighter grip on her patience. "We're out, ma'am," the attendant said, voice steady. "Can I get you juice or still water?" Felicia's laugh was venomous. "Still water? What am I, a stray? I paid for first class. Do you even know what that means?" The cabin froze, all eyes on the showdown. Darius yanked an earbud out, his curiosity outweighing his resolve to tune her out. He'd heard this rant before. Passengers losing it over nothing, wielding "I paid for this" like a weapon. But Felicia's escalation felt different, a thread of desperation beneath the bluster. The attendant's smile twitched, her composure fraying as Felicia muttered, "Incompetent. Cheap." The cowboy's fan snickered, and whispers rippled through the rows. Darius's mind raced. Was she just a loudmouth, or was this a fuse about to blow? He'd seen flights turn ugly over less, a drunk guy swinging at a crew member, a woman smuggling contraband in her purse. Felicia didn't look the type, but looks lied. His TSA brain kicked in, scanning her. Gold chains, loud top, no bag in sight. "Where's her stuff?" The question gnawed at him, a loose end in a scene already teetering on chaos. "40 minutes in, the flight was a powder keg and Felicia was the match. The attendant retreated, leaving her fuming in her seat, but the air crackled with unspoken tension. Darius sipped his ginger ale when it finally arrived, the cold fizz a lifeline to normalcy. Around him, passengers traded glances, some amused, some annoyed, all waiting for the next act. He couldn't shake the feeling that Felicia's drama was a smokescreen, a gut hunch from years of watching people unravel. Was she a decoy? A prelude to something worse? He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. This wasn't just a flight anymore, it was a story, and the twist was coming. Want to know what happens next? Hit that subscribe button and tell us, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Let's unravel this mile-high mystery together. Felicia wasn't done. She leaned forward, jabbing a finger at the attendant. "This is why y'all are losing customers to Southwest. I'm a platinum member. Does that mean nothing to you people? I deserve better than this." The attendant took a step back, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "I'll check with the galley, ma'am, but I can't promise anything." Felicia scoffed, folding her arms. "You'd better, or I'm filing a complaint the second we land. I've got 50,000 followers on X. They'll hear about this." Darius shook his head, popping his earbud back in. He'd seen influencers pull the "Do you know who I am" card before, usually right before they tried smuggling an extra bag through security. Felicia was a walking stereotype, loud, demanding, and oblivious to the eye rolls around her. The cabin buzzed with low murmurs now, a mix of amusement and irritation rippling through the rows. Darius figured she'd burn herself out eventually. Most did. But then her eyes flicked back, scanning the plane, and landed on him. His stomach dropped. He knew that look, the one passengers got when they decided someone else was the problem. In a nation where tension simmered just below the surface, Darius braced himself. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The drink cart had barely rolled past Darius's row when Felicia's eyes locked onto him like a heat-seeking missile. He'd just settled back into his seat, ginger ale in hand, trying to tune out her earlier tantrum over the sparkling water fiasco. Now, as he stretched his legs in the exit row of the Delta flight from Chicago to Dallas, her gaze zeroed in. She'd been scanning the cabin for her next target, and Darius, 34, black, and unapologetically taking up his allotted space, apparently fit the bill. He caught her stare out of the corner of his eye, that pinched lip sneer he'd seen too many times working TSA at O'Hare. He pretended not to notice, sipping his drink and scrolling through his phone, but Felicia wasn't one for subtlety. "Hey!" she barked, her voice slicing through the cabin's hum, loud enough to make the toddler 2 rows up drop his iPad. "You back there, sit still. You're hogging the aisle with all that stretching." Darius blinked, glancing around. He wasn't even close to the aisle. His knees barely brushed the seat in front of him. Years of dealing with irate passengers had taught him to keep his cool, so he took a slow breath and met her glare. "I'm not in the aisle, ma'am," he said, voice steady as steel. "Just stretching my legs. I'll settle in a sec." That should have been the end of it, but Felicia's eyes flared like he'd personally insulted her platinum status. "Don't you ma'am me," she snapped, twisting in her first-class seat to face him fully. "I've been watching you since we boarded, acting like this plane's your personal gym. This isn't some Southside block party. People like you need to know your place." The words hit like a punch. That loaded phrase, "people like you," hanging in the air like cigarette smoke in a dive bar. Darius's jaw tightened, a familiar heat creeping up his neck. He'd heard it before, from travelers who thought his badge meant he was help, not authority. But up here, at 30,000 feet, with every head turning, it stung different. The cabin went quiet, save for the drone of the engines. A guy in a Cubs cap across the aisle shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Darius and Felicia. The mom, with the toddler, clutched her kid closer, whispering something about keeping it down. Darius could feel the weight of their stares, some curious, some nervous, all waiting for his next move. He'd spent a decade at TSA diffusing blow-ups over pocket knives and oversized shampoo bottles. He knew how to stay level-headed. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his tone even, though the edge was there if you listened close. Felicia leaned forward, her gold chains clinking. "You heard me," she shot back, louder now, like she was auditioning for a reality show. "I don't know how you even got on this flight, but you need to show some respect. I paid good money for this seat. $700, not some standby deal, and I'm not here to deal with people like you disrupting everything." The standby jab landed harder than she probably meant it to. Darius had gotten the seat last minute, a perk of his job, but how the hell did she know that? Or was it just a lucky guess, another arrow in her quiver of assumptions? Either way, it lit a spark. He set his ginger ale down, hands resting on his knees, and locked eyes with her. He wasn't about to let this escalate into a shouting match, not on a plane, not with a 3-hour flight still ahead. But Felicia's entitlement was a runaway train, and Darius was stuck on the tracks. Around him, the murmurs started. Low whispers from the business guy tapping his laptop, a "here we go" from the Cowboys fan up front. Felicia had turned a minor annoyance into a public spectacle, and in America, where every flight felt like a pressure cooker of clashing egos, Darius knew this was just the beginning. The air in the cabin thickened, a stew of tension and unspoken thoughts. Felicia's outburst had flipped a switch. Passengers who'd been half asleep or buried in their screens were now wide awake, rubbernecking like it was a highway pileup. Darius kept his cool, years of training kicking in. He wasn't just some random guy in 23B, he was a TSA agent, used to staring down chaos without blinking. But this wasn't a security line. This was personal. "I'm just trying to fly like everyone else, ma'am," he said, voice calm but firm, the kind he used to talk a nervous flyer out of a meltdown. No need to make this a thing. It was a lifeline, a chance for her to back off, but Felicia snatched it and snapped it in half. "A thing?" she sneered, her voice dripping with condescension. "People like you always play innocent. I saw you eyeing me since takeoff. Don't think I didn't notice. You probably think you're owed my seat or something. I'll have TSA waiting at the gate, mark my words." That TSA line almost made Darius laugh. Ironic, considering his badge was tucked in his wallet, inches away. But the humor faded fast. Her words weren't just loud. They were a dog whistle, and he knew it. People like you wasn't about his stretching. It was about his skin, his hoodie, the way he didn't shrink under her glare. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closing in as every eye bored into him. A white-haired guy in a golf polo near the front muttered something to his wife, who nodded grimly. The Cubs fan looked away, suddenly fascinated by his tray table. Darius's pulse kicked up, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of it. Being the target again, in a country where innocent until proven guilty didn't always apply to guys who looked like him. Then Felicia went nuclear. "You don't even belong on this plane," she spat, standing now, her voice bouncing off the overhead bins. "I bet you're one of those freeloaders. Probably used some scam to get that seat. If it were up to me, people like you wouldn't be allowed within 10 miles of an airport." The words landed like a Molotov cocktail, igniting the tension into something raw and electric. Darius's fists clenched, knuckles pressing into his thighs. He'd faced worse. Drunk passengers cussing him out, travelers blaming him for delays. But this was a gut punch. Up here, with nowhere to walk away, it was him against her, and she was betting on the crowd to back her up. The flight attendant from earlier hovered nearby, clipboard trembling in her hands, clearly out of her depth. "Ma'am, please," she started, but Felicia cut her off. "Don't please me. Do your job and handle this." The turning point hit like a thunderclap. Darius felt the shift, not just in Felicia's escalating rage, but in himself. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was a symbol, whether he liked it or not. Every slur she threw was a test, and every second he stayed calm was a win. But it wasn't easy. The anger simmered, hot and sharp, a decade of microaggressions bubbling up, every random pat-down he'd endured as a teen, every sideways glance at the gate. He took a deep breath, locking it down. He had a sister waiting in Dallas, a nephew on the way. He wasn't about to let Felicia ruin that, but as her finger jabbed the air, accusing him of crimes he hadn't committed, Darius knew this wasn't over. The real fight was coming, and in the pressure cooker of a packed flight over the heartland, it was about to get ugly. The Delta flight from Chicago to Dallas had turned into a pressure cooker, and Darius Coleman, seated in 23B, was right in the middle of the heat. Felicia's earlier outburst, calling him out for stretching his legs and hurling "people like you" like a verbal grenade, had left the cabin simmering. Now, an hour into the flight, with the plane stretching endlessly below, she was back at it, and this time it felt like there was no way out. She'd been stewing in her first-class seat, her gold chains glinting under the cabin lights, muttering just loud enough for the rows around her to catch snippets. Disrespectful. Shouldn't be here. Typical. Darius, sipping his ginger ale, tried to block it out, his earbuds dangling uselessly around his neck. He'd dealt with worse in his decade at TSA, screaming matches over confiscated vape pens, travelers threatening to sue over missed flights. But this was different. This was personal, and it was public, and the tight confines of the plane made it feel like a cage with no exit. Then Felicia stood up again, her leopard print top straining as she planted herself in the aisle, hands on hips. The cabin collectively tensed. Passengers who'd been dozing or scrolling froze, sensing the storm about to break. "I've had enough," she declared, her voice booming like she was addressing a rally. "This man," she jabbed a manicured finger at Darius, "is making everyone uncomfortable. I don't know why y'all are letting him sit there like he owns the place." Darius's pulse kicked up, but he kept his face neutral, hands resting on his knees. He wasn't about to give her the reaction she wanted, not yet. The mom, with the toddler 2 rows up, clutched her kid tighter, whispering, "Oh, Lord, not again." The Cubs fan across the aisle muttered a quiet "Jesus" under his breath, shaking his head. Felicia's eyes burned with righteous fury, and she wasn't stopping. "I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is okay. He's a problem, and you all know it." The accusation hung heavy, and Darius felt the shift. Passengers who'd been neutral now glanced his way, some with unease, others with pity. Felicia was playing a game he'd seen too many times in America. Turn the black guy into the villain and watch the crowd pick a side. The flight attendant from earlier, the one with the tight bun, rushed over, her clipboard trembling slightly. "Ma'am, please take your seat," she said, voice firm but fraying at the edges. Felicia whirled on her. "Don't you dare tell me what to do! This is your fault for not handling him. He's been glaring at me this whole flight, probably planning something. I know how people like him operate." The people like him hit Darius like a slap, and his fists clenched, knuckles pressing into his thighs. He'd heard it at TSA checkpoints, passengers questioning his authority, assuming he didn't belong, but up here, with no badge to flash, it was rawer, sharper. The tension spiked, a live wire crackling through the cabin. The business guy with the laptop shut it with a snap, staring openly now. The Cowboys fan up front leaned into the aisle, muttering, "She's lost it." But no one moved to stop her. Not the crew, not the passengers. It was the classic American standoff. Everyone waiting for someone else to fix it. Felicia took a step closer, her voice rising to a shriek. "I demand you do something. He's a danger to this flight. I can feel it. You think I'm just some crazy lady, but I've got rights. I paid $700 for this seat, and I'm not sitting here with him lurking back there." Darius finally spoke, his voice low but cutting through her noise like a blade. "I'm not lurking, ma'am. I'm sitting. You're the one making a scene." Her eyes bulged, face flushing red. "A scene? You've got some nerve. You've been threatening me this whole time, turning everyone against me." The absurdity of it, him, a TSA agent who'd spent years keeping flights safe, cast as the bad guy, would have been funny if it weren't so infuriating. The attendant stepped between them, hands raised. "Ma'am, sit down, or we'll have to escalate this." Felicia laughed, bitter and loud. "Escalate? Good. Get the pilot out here. I want him off this plane." The cabin was a powder keg now, every word from her lips fanning the flames. Darius's training screamed at him to stay calm, de-escalate, don't engage. But the personal sting of her words, the public humiliation, made it feel impossible. He was trapped, 30,000 feet up, with a woman who saw him as less than human and a plane full of people too scared or indifferent to intervene. It was a deadlock, and it looked like nothing could break it. The plane jolted slightly as it hit a pocket of turbulence, a fitting underscore to the chaos unfolding inside. Felicia's tirade had pushed the crew to their limit, and the lead flight attendant, a stocky guy with a Texas drawl, radioed the cockpit. Minutes later, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we're dealing with a situation. Please stay seated. We'll be landing in Dallas soon." Felicia smirked, folding her arms like she'd won. Darius stayed still, his mind racing. He could have shut this down earlier, flashed his TSA creds and called her bluff, but he'd held back, curious to see how far she'd take it. Now, with the plane descending and her accusations ringing in everyone's ears, the moment of truth was here. As the wheels touched down at DFW, Felicia leapt up the second the seatbelt sign blinked off, storming to the front. "I need security!" she bellowed, cutting off passengers grabbing their bags. "That man's a threat! Check him before he gets away!" The cabin buzzed, eyes darting to Darius. He stood slowly, slinging his backpack over his shoulder, and followed the flow toward the exit. 2 airport cops met them at the gate, their faces stern but neutral. Felicia pointed at Darius, triumphant. "There he is! I told you, he's trouble! I don't feel safe with him walking free!" The cops approached Darius, one hand on his radio. "Sir, step aside for a moment. We've got a complaint." Darius nodded, calm as ever, and reached into his pocket, slowly, deliberately, pulling out his wallet. He flipped it open, revealing a TSA badge that gleamed under the terminal lights. "I'm Darius Coleman, TSA O'Hare Station," he said, voice steady and clear. "Been with the agency 10 years. I'm on a personal trip, but if you need to verify, call my supervisor." The cop's eyes widened, then flicked to Felicia, whose jaw dropped like a trap door. The smugness drained from her face, replaced by a mix of shock and panic. "Wait, what?" she stammered, stepping back. "TSA? That can't be right." Darius turned to her, his gaze unflinching. "You spent this whole flight calling me a threat. Turns out, I'm the guy who keeps planes like this safe every day. Funny how that works, huh?" The cops exchanged a look, one already pulling out his phone to confirm. Mr. Coleman, sorry for the mix-up," the other said, voice sheepish. "We'll take it from here," Felicia floundered, her hands flapping. "I didn't know. I just thought—" "You thought what?" Darius cut in, sharp but controlled. "That I didn't belong because of how I look? You didn't know me, but you sure acted like you did." The crowd at the gate, passengers who'd watched her rant, murmured, heads shaking. Felicia's crusade had backfired spectacularly, and now she stood alone, exposed. The cops turned to her, their tone shifting. "Ma'am, we need to talk about your behavior on that flight." Darius adjusted his backpack and walked off, leaving her sputtering. The twist wasn't just his badge. It was the mirror it held up to her, and to everyone who'd stayed silent. In America, where assumptions could ignite a firestorm, the truth had a way of landing harder than the plane itself. As Darius Coleman walked away from the gate at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, the fluorescent lights cast long shadows behind him. The chaos of the Delta flight from Chicago, Felicia's venomous accusations, her insistence that he was a threat, faded into the hum of rolling suitcases and gate announcements. At 34, Darius had seen his share of prejudice, from TSA checkpoints to everyday life in America, but today's ordeal stung differently. It wasn't just Felicia's words, "People like you don't belong." It was the silence of the other passengers, the way they'd watched her try to tear him down without a word. Now, with his TSA badge revealed and Felicia left stammering to the airport cops, the truth had won, but the victory felt bittersweet. Felicia stood frozen near the gate, her leopard print top and gold chains looking garish under the terminal's glare. The cops' questions grew sharper. "Ma'am, you caused a disturbance based on what, exactly?" And her bravado crumbled. Passengers from the flight shuffled past, casting cold glances her way, their earlier silence replaced by quiet judgment. Darius didn't look back. He'd learned long ago that people like Felicia thrived on attention, and he wasn't about to give her more. Adjusting his backpack, he blended into the crowd, just another traveler in a bull's hoodie heading to baggage claim. But inside, the weight lingered. Every random security check he'd endured, every skeptical glance at O'Hare, echoed in her outburst. For Darius, this was another day in a country wrestling with its divides. He thought of his sister in Dallas, waiting with a smile and a plate of barbecue for her baby shower. That was why he kept going. Family, purpose, the chance to prove the Felicia's wrong. As he stepped outside into the Texas heat, he knew moments like this, where truth cut through ignorance, mattered. For Americans stuck in the churn of assumptions and snap judgments, the lesson was clear. Prejudice builds walls, but facts tear them down. Felicia's humiliation was her own doing, and Darius's quiet strength was his answer, a reminder that justice, however delayed, always lands. Jasmine Brooks sat there, her caramel latte cooling on the table as the officer's demand for her ID hung in the air like a bad smell. The Brew Haven coffee shop, once a cozy escape, now felt like a stage, with every pair of eyes in the room flicking between her and the cop standing over her. At 32, she'd seen her share of tense moments, interrogations, standoffs, even a few close calls on the job as an FBI agent, but this was different. This wasn't a suspect or a crime scene. This was her day off, her space, and yet here she was, pinned under the weight of this guy's stare. She couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Causing trouble? She'd been sitting quietly, scrolling her phone for a playlist while the rest of the shop went about their business. The college kids were still typing away, the dad was still wrangling his toddler, and the older woman with the paperback hadn't even looked up. So why her? Keeping her cool, Jasmine tilted her head slightly, meeting the officer's gaze. "I'm just having coffee," she said, her voice steady but firm, the kind of tone she'd perfected in FBI training. "Can you tell me why I'm the only one being asked for ID?" The question wasn't confrontational, not yet, but it carried an edge, a challenge she hoped he'd catch. The officer, whose name tag read P. Donnelly, didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer, his shadow swallowing the sunlight on her table. I don't need to explain myself, he snapped, his Chicago accent thick and clipped. We've got complaints about someone who looks like you, and I'm checking it out. You gonna cooperate, or what? The word complaints hit her like a jab. Complaints from who? The barista who'd just smiled at her? The toddler smearing crumbs? It didn't add up, and she knew it. She'd grown up in Bronzeville, navigated plenty of sideways looks and unspoken assumptions, but this felt personal, like he'd walked in with a script and she was the star. I'm not refusing, she said, leaning back in her chair, crossing her arms to mirror his stance. I just want to know what I've done wrong. I've been here 15 minutes, tops. Donnelly's face tightened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. You don't get to ask questions, he said, his voice dropping low, almost a growl. You get to show me your ID, or we've got a problem. The shop was dead quiet now, the hum of conversation replaced by the faint hiss of the espresso machine. Jasmine felt the heat rising in her chest, a mix of anger and disbelief. She wasn't some kid he could bully, she was a federal agent for God's sake, but flashing her badge wasn't the play here. Not yet. She wanted to see how far he'd push this, what he'd do if she didn't bend. I'm not looking for trouble, she said, her tone still neutral but her eyes locked on his. I'm asking for a reason, that's all. Donnelly leaned in, close enough that she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said, his words dripping with menace. Hand it over, or we're taking a trip downtown. Downtown. The threat landed heavy, and for a split second she pictured it. Cuffed in the back of his cruiser, hauled to the Evanston PD over nothing, her day off ruined. She knew her rights, knew he had no probable cause, but she also knew how this could go. She'd seen it too many times, heard the stories from her cousins, her friends, even her own mom back in the day. A black woman in a hoodie and a cap didn't get the benefit of the doubt, not with a guy like this. Still, she wasn't about to let him steamroll her. With a slow exhale, she reached into her pocket, pulled out her wallet, and slid her driver's license across the table. There, she said, her voice flat. Happy now? He snatched it up, barely glancing at it before tossing it back with a smirk. Jasmine Brooks, huh? You from around here or just passing through? The question was laced with sarcasm, like he'd already decided she didn't belong. Does it matter? She shot back, her patience thinning. His smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl. Watch your tone, he barked, loud enough to make the college kids jump. I'm the one asking questions here. That was it. The line where irritation turned to fury. She clenched her fists under the table, fighting the urge to tell him exactly who he was dealing with. He didn't see a person. He saw a stereotype, a target. And she was done playing nice. Before Jasmine could fire back, Donnelly straightened up, his hand dropping to the radio clipped to his chest. You're coming with me, he said, his voice booming through the shop. We'll sort this out at the station. The words hit like a punch, and the air in Brew Haven froze. The dad pulled his toddler closer, the older woman finally looked up from her book, and the barista peeked over the counter, wide-eyed. Jasmine's heart slammed against her ribs, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it. This wasn't about coffee or loitering anymore. This was a power trip, plain and simple. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice low and steady, cutting through the silence. Not unless you've got a real reason to detain me. I'm finishing my drink, and then I'm leaving. That's it. Donnelly's face turned beet red, his eyes blazing. You don't tell me what you're doing, he snapped, stepping closer until he loomed over her, his bulk blocking out the light. I'm telling you, get up or I'll make you. The threat was real now, his hand hovering near his cuffs, and Jasmine's mind raced. She could de-escalate, walk away, let him win, but that wasn't her. She'd spent years proving herself in a world that didn't always want her to succeed, and she wasn't about to let this guy humiliate her in front of a room full of strangers. You're making a mistake, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, sharp and deliberate. You have no idea who you're talking to. He laughed, a short, ugly sound, and got in her face so close she could see the sweat beading on his forehead. Oh, I know exactly who you are, he sneered. "Some smart mouth who thinks she's above the law. You're coming with me, one way or another." The room held its breath, the tension thick enough to choke on. Jasmine's fingers twitched, itching to reach for her badge, but she held back. She wanted him to dig his own grave, to show his hand. And then it happened. His radio crackled to life, a garbled voice cutting through the standoff. Donnelly froze, his head tilting as he listened, his expression shifting from smug to uncertain. Whatever he heard, it threw him off, and for the first time he looked unsure,